At 2 in the morning, my ceiling rattled like maracas, and a laugh I didn't recognize floated through the vents. I was newly single, clinging to quiet like a life raft, and my neighbor was a thunderstorm with tap shoes. I wrote notes, made tea, practiced patience. Then a blackout, a flashlight, and a hand at my door changed everything. The noise I hated belonged to a heart I'd been waiting for without knowing it. It started with listening, finally. If this story warms you, please like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell. Your support helps more gentle love stories grow. The winter I met him, the sky over the city had a way of blushing at sunset, like it was embarrassed by how early the dark arrived. I had moved into a modest apartment on the second floor of a brick building with a stubborn old oak pressed against its shoulder. The tree and the building had probably argued through decades of weather, and in the end, they learned to lean into each other. I noticed that the first day, balancing a box labeled kitchen on my hip, that natural cooperation. It made me think maybe, just maybe, I could learn to lean again, too. The apartment smelled faintly like lemons and fresh paint. The previous tenant had left a tiny ceramic bird on the windowsill, white and simple, as if to say, "Here's a friend for when the evenings are long." I set the bird next to the pot of basil I had brought from my old place. Basil doesn't love winter, but mine was stubborn, too, and we belonged there among the stubborn things. I chose this building because a woman named Sylvia at the realty office had put a star sticker next to it on her listing sheet and winked. "Quiet, safe, and a block from the best deli," she said. "Plus, the landlord is a retired principal. The kind who reminds you to wear a sweater." I smiled like I remembered sweaters. At that point, I was remembering everything, remembering how to cook for one, remembering how to sleep across a bed that felt like a stage, wide and exposed. I was remembering how to make small talk with the mail carrier, how to stand in line and not check my phone, how to hear my name in my own voice. My first night, I fell asleep early, the kind of early that comes with relief and a bit of exhaustion. The radiator wheezed like a dragon and then settled into a reassuring hum. Around 2:30, a laugh spilled through the vents, rich, full, the kind of laugh that announces a story, not a punchline. Then came feet moving across hardwood above me. Something clinked against something else. A burst of applause, or maybe it was the sound of someone clapping their hands to keep them warm in the kitchen. I lay there, eyes open in the blue dark, counting my breaths and listing things I could be grateful for. A roof, the lemon smell, the oak. Another laugh, higher this time, and the sound of a box dropping, and then, unmistakably, a few bright cymbal taps. Cymbals. My neighbor had a drum kit. In the morning, I made coffee and leaned out my kitchen window to look into the narrow space between buildings. The wind moved the oak in slow circles, stirring dry leaves together like a community meeting. On the other side of the alley, a window with a crooked blind glowed soft yellow. I wondered if my upstairs neighbor was drinking coffee too, or if he slept late after a night that sounded like a rehearsal for Friday. I wrote a note. I wrote it the way I wish people had written to me when I messed up. With warmth first, then the ask. "Hi there, welcome to the building. I'm downstairs in 2B. Last night I heard some music late. I love music and I also love sleep. Any chance we can agree on quiet after 10? Thank you. Hope to meet soon." Ben, I taped it to the upstairs door. The door had a sticker near the knob of a little planet with rings and a smile. Saturn as a cartoon. The sticker had a chip in it where a key had bumped it 1,000 times. Whoever lived there had lived. The hallway was cool and smelled faintly like laundry and someone's grandmother's perfume, floral and clean. At noon, my note was gone. In its place, an envelope with my name, Ben, was taped to my own door. Inside was another note, folded with care, written in tidy block letters. "Hi, Ben. Sorry about the noise. New to the building, too. Unpacking late and... yeah, there's a drum kit. Not for loud gigs. I play with brushes mostly. Let's set up quiet hours. Also, I owe you cookies or earplugs. Your choice. Evan 3A. P.S. Welcome to the building." It made me smile in spite of the circles under my eyes. I put the note on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a peach I'd picked up at a roadside stand in Georgia years before. My first real smile in days stuck there with it. At 6, I heard footsteps in the hallway, measured and polite. A knock on my door, 3 gentle raps. When I opened it, The man from 3A held out a small paper bag and a hopeful expression. He was wearing a denim jacket softened by time, a scarf looped twice, and an apology in his eyes. Brown eyes, warm and unexpectedly bright. A smudge of paint marked his wrist just above where his pulse beat. Something about that tiny unplanned mark made him real to me before anything else. "Cookies," he said. Earplugs felt unfriendly. "I can get those too if you want, but my mother raised me to bring butter and sugar to neighbors." I laughed. It surprised me, like the first time you hear a song's harmony from a different room. "Cookies are friendlier," I said. "I'm Ben," Evan, he said. We shook hands. His palm was warm. His voice had an unhurried cadence to it, as if he had all the time in the world to listen to what you had to say. We stood in the doorway for a moment, the kind of moment where you could imagine this becoming a tradition, where conversations would grow out of a threshold like ivy. He cleared his throat. "I should say I play drums, but I promise I'm considerate. I teach kids and play at the community center on weekends." The kitchen clanking was me dropping a measuring cup, twice. "I appreciate the note," I said. "And the cookies. I sold my drum kit in college and kept my quiet. So we're a complimentary set." "Complimentary is a word I like," he said, and the corners of his eyes crinkled. "I also like your basil. I saw it in your window. I'm powerless against good basil." "Feel free to knock and ask for a sprig," I said, then immediately wondered if that sounded like a flimsy invitation to something else. I was out of practice. He didn't seem to register anything risky about basil, which was a relief. "Deal," he said. "Also, quiet after 10, absolutely. If anything ever slips, just knock. I'm usually awake. The drums are quieter with brushes, and I can use the practice pad." He gestured with the paper bag. "There's also a note in there with my number. Use it if you need." I took the bag and our fingers brushed. A tiny spark jumped like a static shock you almost enjoy. "Thanks, Evan." He smiled again, soft and real, then waved. "Have a good night, Ben." When I carried the cookies into my kitchen and opened the bag, I found a dozen chocolate chip cookies and a folded recipe card with Evan's peace offerings at the top like a joke. Below it, written small, was a phone number and a short line. "Quiet hours, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., unless an earthquake, a thunderstorm, or an emergency dog bath." Emergency dog bath made me laugh out loud by myself, a sound that made the apartment feel less new. I ate a cookie with my coffee and it was good, like a memory of summer in the middle of winter. If I had been a signal tower, I would have sent one quiet message across to 3A. "You're forgiven for last night. The city did what cities do." It snowed one day, then it rained the next, then it couldn't decide and did both. I wrote emails from my kitchen table, had a running relationship with the deli owner who called me buddy after day 3, and learned the particular rhythm of the building. Sylvia's promise of quiet mostly held. There was the daily ballet of the UPS delivery person, the occasional argument of the radiator, and somewhere above, the soft practice of brushes on a drumhead in the late afternoon. It sounded like someone sweeping a porch, careful and steady. Sometimes I caught myself listening for Evan's steps on the stairs. It was the sort of habit a person can develop without admitting that it's a habit. In the grocery store, I started buying extra eggs because the idea of dropping off a carton upstairs when I had too many felt neighborly. Then I would put them into an omelet and tell myself I was being practical. One night, a storm rolled in with a set of shoulders. Thunder grumbled. The lights flickered and were brave about it, and then, all at once, everything went quiet. Not the quiet of late at night, but the dense quiet of a power outage. The refrigerator stopped humming. The street seemed to hold its breath. I stood in the living room and watched the sky over the oak for lightning, counting like I used to count when I was a kid, 1,000, 1,000. I heard footsteps in the hallway, then a knock. When I opened my door, there was Evan with a flashlight tucked under his chin, the beam making a wide circle on the floor like a moon. He had a lantern in his other hand. "You got candles?" he asked, a little out of breath. "I have some if you don't." "I have a few," I said. "Tea lights and one citronella, which I know is weird in January, but it was on sale." "Citronella's a vibe," he said. "I'm making a pot of soup on my gas stove. Do you want in on soup? Shared soup is better in a blackout." Something softened in me in the space between the question and my answer. "Yes, I said, surprised by how right it felt. Yes, I'd like soup. Bring your mug, he said, because we were improvising. And improvisation loves plain containers. We navigated the stairs with our lanterns like we were in a story we both remembered from years ago. His apartment was above mine but arranged differently, an airy version of mine with windows that watched the street. The space smelled like garlic and rosemary, and in the gentle light of a few candles, it looked more like a workshop than a living room. There were canvases leaning against one wall, half-finished, a guitar on a stand near the corner, a drum kit with a piece of felt over the snare like a blanket. On the kitchen counter, there were mason jars with paintbrushes standing up in them like flowers. A dog bed sat near the couch with a squeaky carrot on it, but no dog in sight. Dog? I asked, nodding toward the bed. Sometimes, he said, and stirred the soup. I foster. Not always. Sometimes the bed is waiting. What makes it an emergency bath? I asked, finding a smile. He grinned. When you rescue a senior dog who finds the one mud puddle between here and the shelter, or when you find out your dog is part fish. Either scenario requires towels, a sense of humor, and understanding neighbors. Good to know, I said. I like dogs, even fish-adjacent ones. He glanced at me, and his eyes warmed like he was putting me under a lamp to check for cracks and found none. He ladled soup into my mug with care. To new neighbors in Citronella, he said, and we toasted with mugs like we had been doing that all our lives. We ate standing in the kitchen because blackouts ask you to break small formalities and remember that the best meals often happen over a counter. He asked me about my work, and I told him I wrote educational materials, handbooks, guides for caregivers, newsletters for senior centers. His eyebrows lifted in that good work way people sometimes forget to convey. He told me he taught kids on Saturday mornings at the community center, kids whose hands were made restless by the world and settled by rhythm. He told me he played old standards on Thursday nights at a cafe that smelled permanently like cinnamon. He shrugged when I asked about the paintings. Those are for me, he said, but he said it as if maybe that wasn't true anymore. In the candlelight, the colors looked like they were breathing. We learned each other's families in broad strokes. He grew up 2 towns over and still visited his grandmother, who called him every Sunday to remind him to eat oranges. I grew up further away, in a house where the radio was always on and the news was always important, and where we had a system for everything. That system had kept me safe until it didn't, and then it took me a while to stop waiting for instructions. He nodded, a long nod that respected the time that takes. His hand found the counter, then held still beside mine. Our hands were a few inches apart, our mugs on the same ring of condensation. We listened to the storm move past, the city's sirens doing their work in the distance, the booms farther apart. In the brief, thick silence between thunder and whatever came next, I realized I had been measuring my days by their noises and the gaps between them. I realized the quiet scared me because it was vast and therefore honest. And I realized this man's version of noise had already made a different kind of space in my head. When the power came back, the lights jumped and the fridge exhaled, and we both laughed the way people do when something is both silly and huge. Time rolled back into its grooves. He walked me to the door and then hesitated like he wanted to say something else. He didn't. Instead, he said, "Hey, Thursday nights at the cafe. If you ever want a seat, I can hold one for you." "It's early. We're done well before 10. I have to be good for the kids." "I'll think about it," I said, which was adult speak for I want to, but I don't know what to do with that wanting yet. He nodded like he understood that language. The next morning, I brought him a small jar of basil pesto I had made months back and frozen for a snow day. I put a label on it. Basil is better shared. 2B. I left it on his doormat and paced my kitchen. 10 minutes later, I heard quick steps and then a knock, and his grin was there again, lit from within like a windowsill in early evening. "Best breakfast I've had," he said, lifting the jar. "Don't tell my grandmother. Your secret's safe," I said. "As long as you save me a spoonful for soup next time." "Deal," he said. "By the way, the kids at the center are doing a winter show in a few weeks. We raise money for instruments and repairs. If you like, you could help us make the flyers. You have a good way with words." The idea of being useful hit me in a place that had been hungry. "I'd love to help," I said too quickly, then corrected to, yes, I'd like that very much. They'll like you very much, he said, like it was a simple fact, handed over like salt. My face warmed the way it does when someone hands you something you need and you feel the weight of it. Small and perfect. The next 2 weeks were a slow, kind study in how people inch toward each other the way ivy moves along brick. Soft knocks at my door for a sprig of basil, a cup of sugar, my printer because his ink ran out. Mine knocks on his for a flashlight, an extra towel, because a movie he loved had to be watched with the person who loved it, according to him. Or else it was like reading someone's mail out of order. We learned each other's coffee habits, the way each of us stood at a window for the weather, what we did when we were sad. He baked when he felt restless. I cleaned the same countertop many times. Some nights I heard the whisper of brushes on a snare above, and it felt like someone smoothing out the day. On a Thursday, I went to the cafe. I told myself I would stay for a song. He reserved a seat at the back for me, and when I walked in, the smell of cinnamon did, in fact, hug me from the doorway. He stood near a small stage with the other musicians, and his face when he saw me was quiet and bright. He didn't wave. He didn't make a show. He just looked relieved in a way that made my chest loosen. They played Autumn Leaves, and something about the way he listened to the other players, the way he watched the piano player's hands and anticipated them, the way his shoulders lifted at the exact right moments and dropped again, was its own music. I stayed for the entire set and then for a pie, because the cafe insisted after 9 p.m. that pie was not optional. Outside, on the sidewalk that still remembered snow, I told him, "You play like you're grateful to be in the room." He blinked a few times. "Well," he said, "I am." He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets like his palms were too honest. "I like when you're in the room." I could have made a joke. I could have built a wall out of small bricks. Instead, I said, "I like it too." We started on the flyers. He brought his laptop to my kitchen table where my basil watched. We used big fonts and gentle words. Join us for a winter warm-up. Music, cocoa, community. Donations welcome for instruments and repair supplies. He asked me if repair supplies sounded too stuffy, and I told him it sounded like care. He looked at me like he was filing that away for later. We printed in the library, the printer coughing every few pages like an old man with opinions. At the counter, the librarian, a woman with white hair like a halo, asked what the event was about. Evan told her with his whole face, and she nodded like you nod at a person who's still doing what you wish you had the energy to do. We posted the flyers at the community center, at the deli where the owner said, "My niece. She plays clarinet," with a pride that held up the whole block. At the laundromat with the broken rolling cart that traveled in gentle circles. Children ran up and down the hallway of the community center while we taped paper to painted walls. He introduced me to everyone. "This is Ben," he said over and over, like introducing me to a friend who was already tender around my name. The night before the event, I heard the staccato thump of what could only be one thing, little paws racing across hardwood. I smiled and waited for the inevitable bark that did not come. Then, a thud, a yelp, and something like chaos. That sticky chaos that comes from water. I went upstairs and knocked. Evan opened the door, hair damp, a towel over his shoulder, a scent of wet dog joy. "Emergency bath?" I asked. "Emergency bath," he said, blowing a lock of hair off his forehead and chuckling like he was both exhausted and happy about it. A dog peeked out from behind his knees. She was gray around the muzzle, all ribs and eyes, a little like a cloud that had to fight its way through too much summer. "This is Pearl," he said softly. "She's here for a few days, maybe a week. She's all heart. Poor thing found every puddle between here and the corner." Pearl sniffed my hand with great seriousness, then pressed her head against my knee like we had known each other for 100 years. My heart slipped its careful pace. "Hi, Pearl," I said, and my voice changed on its own into the voice I use when the world shows me something gentle. Pearl's tail thumped in that way dog tails do when they need to knock on your door from the inside. "I didn't mean to be loud," he said, a quick flash of apology back on his face. "Bath noise is holy noise," I said, and his shoulders dropped and he laughed, warm and surprised. The event day came with that particular nervous energy that makes coffee both necessary and ill-advised. The community center gym smelled like every gym in every town, rubber and floor wax and a hint of popcorn from a machine nobody had ever cleaned properly. Parents and grandparents filled the metal chairs, wrapped in scarves and good intentions. The kids were shiny and a little feral in their excitement. Evan wore a sweater his grandmother had knit, navy with elbows that had learned to apologize for bumping into things. They played. The small hands on big instruments, the way every sound held their whole selves, nothing halfway, nothing withheld. Evan introduced them and stood slightly behind them, his presence there like a wall that felt like a hug. Between songs, he told the room what they were raising money for. He said, "A drum head wears out like a sneaker. A clarinet reed is small and mortal. A piano bench wobbles like a new calf. These things sound small. They are not small." The room murmured its agreement. A communal sound older than the town. Near the end of the program, one of the kids, a boy with a cowlick that wanted the world to know it was there, stood at the microphone and said, "Mr. Evan fixed my trumpet with a screw from his coffee table." The room laughed. He said, "Next time we'll use real trumpet screws, but until then the coffee table is." Cheering. People clapped in that way that feels like a tide pulling everyone into itself. I stood near the back and held the flyers, in my hand like something precious that had done its job and then became more precious for having done it. I watched Evan watch the room, and the feeling I had was one I recognized from years of family gatherings. It was the feeling of being overfull and hungry at the same time. It was wanting to keep everything just as it was, and also wanting to carry it home and put it in a jar on the windowsill where the white ceramic bird sat. It was the feeling of belonging asking if it could set its suitcase down. After the event, we helped clean up. He moved chairs in stacks of 4, and I wiped tables with a cloth that had seen better days. We walked back to our building in hats and breath that puffed out in front of us like small ghosts. Pearl had fallen asleep on his couch. He didn't want to wake her, so we spoke softly, and then softer still. He made tea. We sat. He said, "I moved in because I needed a reset. I thought I'd be invisible for a while, practice in the afternoons, teach on the weekends, get quiet. Then I dropped a measuring cup the first night and found the neighbor who writes notes like hugs. I felt my eyes water and blamed the steam from the tea. I moved in because defeat is loud when you live with it. I needed quiet. I didn't realize quiet would ask me questions I couldn't answer yet." He nodded once. "Sometimes noise is just a life practicing," he said. "Trying out a better rhythm." We didn't talk about romance because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let a room be exactly what it is and not name it too soon. We talked about the oak and how it knew where to lean. We talked about his grandmother, who said the secret to happiness was comfortable shoes and forgiveness. We talked about how Pearl snored like a tiny motorcycle. Then life did what life does. The next week, my ex sent a text. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical, asking about a houseplant we used to share and the logistics of a check. It pulled on a thread. I was quieter than usual. Laundry folded a little too precisely. The countertop cleaner bottle emptier than it should be. Evan knocked once and then again later. I didn't answer the first time. I did the second, but not all the way, not yet. He showed up with a bag of oranges. "My grandmother," he said, lifting the bag as if invoking her would put good luck into the kitchen. "Also, you look like someone who could use vitamin C and a person to peel one for you." "I'm sorry," I said before anything else, as if sorrow were a toll I had to pay. "I'm having a day." "You don't have to be sorry to me," he said. He unrolled his sleeves and peeled an orange with the care of someone unwrapping fragile history. "Do you want me to listen? Or do you want me to tell you a funny story about a kid named Marcus who called the symbols glitter plates and made me rethink my entire vocabulary?" "Maybe both," I said. So he listened, and then he told me about glitter plates. And in that small blend, I found myself breathing again like a person who had remembered something their body knew all along. One night, there was a misunderstanding. It was a Wednesday, the middle kind of night. I had a deadline and a headache, and somewhere between 8:30 and 9, the sound of sticks on drums leaked down like rain that wouldn't be shooed away. I looked at the clock and it was still before 10, and I knew that. I also knew my head was full and tender. The fact that he was still inside the agreement didn't matter to my nerves. I knocked on his door harder than I had any right to, and he opened it with Pearl at his feet and a question on his face. "I'm sorry," I blurted. "It's too much tonight. I can't." My voice tilted toward Sharp without my consent. He put the sticks on the counter. He nodded. He didn't defend himself. He walked over to the practice pad, the one he had mentioned, and he picked it up. "I'll use this," he said quietly. I just wanted to get something right for the kids before I forgot how it felt in my hands. Shame is a quick species. It bloomed too fast. "I'm sorry," I said again, and he looked like he didn't know where to put his hands to comfort me. "It's okay to ask for quiet," he said. "And it's okay for me to be a little sad I wasn't perfect. We can be both." We were both quiet for a minute, and then he said, "Want to see why I was practicing?" He lifted the practice pad like a peace flag. "It's a duet with Ms. Hayes, the piano teacher. She turns 90 next month. Her hands are—" He searched for a word that would be honest and kind at the same time. "Her hands are doing their brave best. I'm trying to cushion the edges for her." "Of course you are," I said, and the tide in me turned. "Of course you are." We sat on his sofa with Pearl between us, the practice pad on his lap, and he tapped the rhythm with the sticks the way someone hums when they want to share a song but can't play it at the right volume. He counted quietly, 1 and 2 and 3, and I could see the whole thing in my head. The room at the community center, Ms. Hayes's careful hands, the kids watching with respect they couldn't name yet, but would carry with them for a long time. I rested my hand on Pearl's back, and we both settled. When he finished, he looked at me like he wanted me to say something that wasn't an apology. "You're good," I said. "And you're good." He laughed, startled. "Thank you," he said. "That might be my favorite sentence anyone has ever given me." We set firmer quiet hours the next day, not because the first ones had failed, but because relationships, even neighborly ones, live on specifics. We agreed on practice between 5 and 7 or after-school programs except on Wednesdays, my deadline days. We made a shared list on the fridge with a dry erase marker. It felt like making a plan to be kind to ourselves later, which is, I think, what care is. He invited me to his grandmother's birthday on a Sunday afternoon, and I went, carrying a bouquet of tulips that didn't seem like enough, and a lemon cake from the bakery that did. His grandmother, tiny and sharp as a bell, wore a cardigan with a brooch in the shape of a music note. She appraised me the way women who have lived long appraise, quickly, completely, with mercy. "You're the basil," she said, which made me laugh and also made me preen. "You're the one who writes the beautiful flyers," she said, which made me blush. "You sit by me," she commanded. I sat. Evan watched us like he was relieved, like a difficult test had been graded and returned with a smiley face sticker. Later, after we blew out 90 candles together because that many candles need a team, she pulled me close and whispered, "He has always made a lot of sound. It's a gift. He needs someone who hears the music under it. You hear it." It felt like being told a secret I already knew. We walked home through a neighborhood where the hedges had known the same hands for 30 years. He slipped his arm into mine in a way that could still be considered practical on slightly uneven sidewalks. We won't fall because we are together like this. My heart believed him. Spring made a decision to arrive. The stubborn oak gave in finally, and made small green promises at the ends of its branches. Pearl was adopted by a retired nurse who lived 3 blocks away and visited the dog park like church. Evan painted a small portrait of Pearl as a goodbye present and cried while he did it, which he told me like it was nothing and everything. He began teaching a Wednesday class for a group of older adults at the center, people who had always loved music but never learned how to make it. He came home grinning with a paper crown one of them had made him out of a magazine page. And I told him he looked royal in the way that matters. Wise, serviceable, tender. We went to the cafe on Thursdays. Not every week, but enough that the servers knew when to leave an extra spoon on the table for us to share the pie, and when to bring 2 because we had both earned our own. He came to the farmer's market with me on Saturday mornings, and we learned the names of the apple varieties like learning the names of distant cousins. We started saying we without apologizing for it. We were not moving fast so much as we were moving right. When I got sick with a fever that took my legs out from under me, he appeared with ginger ale, a thermometer, and a bag of saltines like a nurse, whose office hours included late night and early morning. He tucked the blanket around my feet with the same care he used to tune a drum head. When he had an art opening, in a small gallery that smelled like paint. White walls, holding up the colors he had kept hidden under his bed for years. I stood in the back where he could see me and let him talk to everyone else first. He came up to me at the end like I was the last poem in a book, saved because it made the whole thing make more sense. And he said, "You being here feels like the rest of the sentence." I breathed in and decided not to ever forget that. On a Sunday afternoon when the air was gentle, we sat on the stoop with iced tea and watched a child on a tricycle ride determinedly toward the end of the block and then turned back like he had reached the border of his country and been stamped and was proud and very tired. Evan put his head on my shoulder in the way people rest in places they are allowed to be. He said quietly, "I'm going to write you a song." "You don't have to," I said, "because modesty is sometimes an old habit." "I want to," he said, because generosity was his new name. "But I won't play it loud." "You can play it loud," I said, because love, I was learning, is generous in return. He laughed into my shoulder. "I like that we have a list on the fridge," he said. "But I like that we don't need it to remember how to be kind." We didn't name anything out loud, not yet, but the naming was there, inside our days, gentle and sure. The kids at the center started calling me Mr. Ben without asking my permission, and they started putting stickers on my sleeve the way small hands claimed something. He brought home a clumsy clay mug a student had made for him, and he gave it to me without fanfare. I began to think about the day the sound of his feet above me might be the sound of his feet, coming home to the same apartment instead of two different places. I didn't hurry that thought. But I took it seriously the way you take seriously getting up to watch a meteor shower at 2 in the morning. Then there was the fundraiser for the adult class. Ms. Hayes's bench was wobbly again. Evan had a plan, of course. He always had a plan that included community, like some people include garlic in everything, as if flavor were a prayer. He asked if I would say a few words at the beginning, about why music matters for people at every age. I wrote them and then rewrote them and then threw them away and then wrote them again. Simpler, truer. In the gym with its faithful smell, I stood at a microphone and told the truth. That rhythm can make a new home inside a person when old ones are gone. That listening is a skill and a gift, and that you can find your way back to yourself by keeping time with someone who believes you can. I looked at Evan, and he looked at me, and no one else was in the room for one ridiculous second. Then he tapped his sticks on the rim of the snare and brought everyone in on two. At the end of the night, under paper lanterns that made the gym look like it was dressed up for a movie, he pulled me aside by the stage curtains that had been hung up with clothespins. "Come up to the roof," he said. "I have something I want to show you before I chicken out." We climbed the stairs, the kind that get narrower the higher you go. The door opened to a small, flat place with a simple view: brick, sky, the stubborn oak's top branches, a satellite dish pointed like a curious nose at the horizon. The air smelled like night. He had brought a small speaker and a blanket because his brain did that. It made plans that included comfort. He pressed play. The first sound was a soft brush on the snare, a hush, hush, hush like a story starting under your breath. Then a simple melody joined, a guitar line built to be remembered. He didn't look at me while it played, which was right. Some moments require the kindness of not staring. The melody rolled like a gentle river over rounded stones. When it ended, he sat on the blanket and finally turned his face toward me. "I made this," he said. "It's not perfect. It might never be. But it's yours if you want it. It's about the first night when the building went dark and you said yes to soup. It's about the way your basil makes my kitchen smell like August in January. It's about how your quiet is the softest place my noise has ever known." I sat down. I put my hand over his. I could feel his pulse moving forward anyway, even though he was trying to hold still. "I want it," I said. "I want all of it." My voice thickened and became a little bit unreliable, and I didn't mind. He nodded and then shook his head, like he couldn't find words, and then he found one. "Okay," he said. It looked small in the air, the way a seed looks small in your palm before you put it into the ground, and then later, the whole tree lives in that word. He kissed me. It was not noisy. It was not slow. It was exactly the speed at which a door opens to people who belong there. He tasted like oranges and cinnamon. The city hummed below us, and the stubborn oak swayed, and somewhere a resourceful pigeon made plans for the morning. We stayed on the roof until the cold reminded us we were human, and then went downstairs, one hand leading the other. We told people in the gentlest order we could. His grandmother first, who said, "I knew," in a way that made it feel like we were catching up to something that had been true for a long time. The deli guy second, who decided we would never pay for pickles again in this lifetime. The librarian third, who stamped a book a little too hard and then made us both library cards with the new address when the time came. The time came months later. Not because we were impatient, but because 2 sets of dishes are a lot when you only use 1 pan. We made a plan for a Saturday when the weather was friendly and we could carry boxes without swearing. I stood in my apartment the night before with the white ceramic bird in my hand and thanked the room for keeping me safe while I learned what safe meant again. Then I brought the bird upstairs and set it on the new windowsill. The basil followed because some friends wear leaves. Living together came with the small negotiations that matter. He liked to leave his shoes by the door at a diagonal. I liked lines. He left them messy sometimes to make me roll my eyes, and then he winked because he liked the part where I bent to fix them, and we bumped shoulders like the beginning of a dance. I liked to stack books on the coffee table like building blocks. He liked tables clear so that they could be repurposed at any moment for a project, a sketch, a lesson. We learned to move our things like we learned to move our steps, toward each other, not away. Quiet hours remained on the fridge, even though it was our fridge now. Not so much because we needed them anymore, but because it reminded us that love is a set of small agreements, honored again and again, until they feel like play. His noisy neighbor's status transformed, in the way stories do when you live inside them. The laughter through the vents became our laughter. The clatter in the kitchen was the sound of us making dinner together, our elbows bumping in a choreography we invented while waiting for the pasta to soften. The drum practice was still practice, sometimes with brushes, sometimes not, depending on the day and the time and the mood of the building. But the sound no longer felt like an interruption. It felt like our house clearing its throat before a song. There were still hard days. We argued once about a plant I overwatered and he underwatered. We argued once about whether to say yes to a weekend trip with friends when both of us had been talking nonstop for weeks and needed 12 hours of naps and 1 of pie. We argued once about nothing and then laughed halfway through and called the argument off because it was boring. On those days, we tested the edges of our care and found them firm. Pearl visited sometimes, and so did other dogs with names like Button and Gus and Miss Ida. They brought with them the smell of parks and the news of the neighborhood, and they left hair on the couch we pretended to object to. Ms. Hayes came to dinner once and brought a pie in a tin from the grocery store and said, "I never learned pastry, but I know good company," and we ate every crumb. In the summer, the community center moved some of their classes outside, and I watched Evan teach under the oak, his shadow playing alongside him on the pavilion floor. He cut the air in time, and the kids cut it too, and together they made a wind I would have recognized anywhere. On our first anniversary, the anniversary we chose, which was the blackout soup night, we stood at the kitchen counter with mugs again. He had saved a little label from the pesto jar like a ticket stub, and he put it on the shelf as if to say, "This is our museum." I made a toast. "To noise," I said. "To the kind that comes with heart and the kind that comes with measuring cups and the kind that makes the neighbors, including us, feel less alone." He raised his mug. "To quiet," he said. "To the kind that heals. To the kind that lets us hear what matters. To the quiet inside your laugh that I can hear from down the hall. If this were a movie, there might be a montage. There would be shots of Basil thriving in a sunny window, of kids in the gym growing taller, of a hand on a doorknob, of shoes by the door becoming 2 pairs and then 3 when a friend forgot theirs, of a magnet on the fridge shaped like a peach, holding a goofy receipt for a cake we bought for no reason at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. There would be a shot of the oak in every season and of us in every quiet one. There would be a shot of Evan tapping, a rhythm on the back of my hand in the grocery store, while we waited for the woman in front, of us to find exact change, and of me leaning my shoulder into his without speaking. because we speak all the time, and quiet is part of the language. I don't know what perfection is, not the airbrushed magazine kind. I know what our version is, and it isn't flawless. It's a fridge list that gets rewritten every time the marker runs dry. It's basil and pearl and oranges and glitter plates. It's a lantern in a blackout and a blanket on a roof, and a song that says yes without needing to be loud. It's a neighbor who was noisy, and then was mine, and then was my neighbor again because we decided we would always be neighbors first. Even in the same home, people who knock and wait for each other to open the door. That's what happened with my noisy neighbor. He turned out perfect for me because he wasn't perfect. He was a person with paint on his wrist and a laugh that moved through vents like sunlight through blinds. He was a person who made soup in a storm and practiced kindness like scales until it became part of his muscle memory. I learned to love the sound of a practice pad and the scratching stop-start of a Sharpie on poster board, and the way he clears his throat before he sings harmony under his breath in the kitchen. He learned to love the night lamp I need when I read and the way I like my socks lined up in small, "Silly pears, if you came by our building now." You'd hear kids' voices from the community center on some afternoons and the soft, steady beat of brush on snare on others. You'd see an old oak defying gravity and us somehow doing the same. You might see a ceramic bird on a windowsill and think nothing of it, but we'd know it was the first witness. You might catch us on the stairs, me carrying a carton of eggs and him carrying a drumhead because life is always asking us to balance new things with fragile ones, and we are answering yes, carefully, together. And if you sat at our table with us and had soup under lantern light while the refrigerator kept time with its hum, you'd hear it, I think, the sound under the noise, the quiet in the middle that holds the whole thing. You'd hear how a laugh through a vent and a knock on a door and a careful note taped to a refrigerator can be the opening bars of a song you will keep humming years later. A song that starts with listening and goes on longer than you expect, but exactly as long as it needs to. I used to think neighbors were luck. I know now they're choices and chances and small, brave yeses. When I couldn't sleep that first night because of the noise, I thought the noise was the problem. It wasn't. The problem was my fear and my tired heart. The solution turned out to be the person making the noise, with his careful hands and his repaired coffee table and his grandma who believes in oranges. He turned out perfect, not because the late nights stopped, but because they began to mean something. They meant there was someone up there who would knock on my door, with a lantern when the power went out, and who would be patient when my head hurt, and who would practice quiet hours with me the way you practice a song, knowing you'll miss the notes sometimes and trusting you'll hit them more often as you go. It turns out that life with the right noisy neighbor is just right. It turns out the songs you learn together are the ones that carry you across winters and blackouts and Wednesdays with headaches and Sundays with cake. It turns out that when I say home, the sound I hear in my head is not silence. It's a careful, steady beat, a soft laughter through the vents, a dog's paws on hardwood, a kettle singing, and two voices saying yes in low voices because the hour is late and the building is sleeping and we are not. Not yet, because we have one more story to tell each other before we turn out the light.